This video is a memory story for the maintenance of romantic relationships and links directly to a revision video that I have made, and the link for that is in the description. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint that accompanies this video, which has the full model essay in, then please tweet me at blonde_pretzel and request one. So the story starts with Richard Branson, and I want you to imagine him in one of his hot air balloons with his wife Joan, and Joan's in charge of activating the burner. So she's in charge of making sure that the burner sends enough hot air into the balloon to make it rise. And Joan's really good at that, so the balloon keeps going up and up and up. And the reason I want you to think of that is because social exchange theory, which is the theory of the maintenance of relationships that we're looking at, is very much focused on profit and loss, and Richard Branson is an extremely profitable businessman. So Richard and his wife Joan in the hot air balloon, the reason that Richard is staying with Joan is because she's providing him more and more and more profit by activating the burner. That's the idea. And so social exchange theory says that we will only stay in a relationship if we're going to get profit from it, and as long as we get more profits from it than costs. So the profits should always outweigh the costs of a relationship. Next, I want you to imagine that Richard Branson and his wife are still in the hot air balloon, but he turns south and faces backwards, and all across the horizon he can see a fleet of his older hot air balloons, and in them are ex-girlfriends, ex-wives, and he can see them all behind him. Next, he turns east and he sees Alan's Sugar in another hot air balloon with his wife, and they're having a candlelit supper and clinking wine glasses. And then he turns north and he's looking ahead, and somewhere right in the distance he can see another hot air balloon, and someone's on it but he can't quite see who it is. So the reason you're imagining that is because it represents the comparison level that the social exchange theory talks about. So the comparison level is where we look at all of our previous relationships and experiences and compare our current relationship to all of those. And if our current person, so Joan, if she compares favourably, then Richard is happy to stay in the relationship. The reason he turns east and looks at Alan Sugar and his relationship is that we also observe others' relationships as well and make sure that our own one compares favourably against others. And when he turns north and looks into the distance, that's to represent the comparison level for alternatives, which means that we will weigh the profitability of our current relationship with that of potential future relationships. So because Richard can't actually see anybody, he can see something in the distance, but he can't see anyone. That means that he's perfectly happy to maintain his current relationship with Joan, because there isn't a comparison level for alternatives. So Joan and Richard quite happy, and then Richard gets a phone call, and it's from the 1970s, and they say, "Hey Richard, can you come and judge a Miss World contest for us?" And he thinks, yeah, okay, but he doesn't tell Joan exactly what's going on. He just says he's been asked to be on a panel, doesn't tell her the truth about what it's about. So they land the balloon and Richard goes off to judge the Miss World contest. But when he gets there, he finds that he's the only person on the panel who is in a relationship. Everybody else is single. And he rates all the women in the Miss World contest with lower ratings than the other people on the panel. So this is to represent research support for the comparison level by Simpson et al., who said that if you're in a relationship, to protect that relationship, you judge attractive people less favourably than those not in a relationship, because you don't want to create a comparison level for alternatives. So their research found that people in relationships do that. So Richard's feeling a bit shallow, having done the Miss World judging. He realises he's not really into that kind of thing, beauty pageants, and so he decides to do some charitable work, and he decides to help the White Ribbon campaign, which is a campaign against violence against women. And so he goes there to offer support and money and help, and he ends up chatting to one of the women that the White Ribbon campaign has helped. And he said, "Why did you stay in the abusive relationship for so long?" And she says, well, she had no income, she had 3 children, and the alternative of leaving her abusive husband and facing poverty and homelessness just didn't seem that it was a justifiable thing to do. So actually, it was more profitable to stay put in that relationship. So this represents the research by Rusbolt and Martz, 1995, who said the comparison level for alternatives can explain why women stay in abusive relationships, and exactly that, what that woman said, that actually if your investments are high, like having children and financial security, and the alternative prospects are bleak, like poverty and homelessness, then staying in the current abusive relationship is more profitable for her and her children than leaving it. So Richard then gets a phone call from his wife, who says, "Where are you, darling?" And he says, "Oh, I'm doing this charitable event at the White Ribbon Campaign." And she says, "No, where were you this morning?" And he's like, "Uh-oh, busted." And she's found out that he was judging the Miss World contest, and she's fuming and have this massive argument on the phone, and they both give as good as they get. The exchange is 50%. It's 1-to-1 of each other screaming at each other. But after the row, they think, "Oh, we do love each other. We better go to integrated behavioural couples therapy and learn how to be more positive to each other." So they go along to the therapy, and it works a treat. So this is to represent research by Gottman and Levinson, who found that unsuccessful marriages had a negative to positive exchange rate of 1-to-1, like 50%, compared to successful marriages of 5-to-1, which is about 20%. So that's why Richard and his wife had the massive Barney on the phone, and they both gave as good as they got to represent that research. And so that research actually had a real world application. So instead of just normal couples therapy, they created something called integrated behavioural couples therapy, where couples learn how to have more positive exchanges. And Christensen et al. Found that 2/3 of 60 couples reported significant improvements as a result of that therapy. So Richard and Joan have made up, and they're perfectly happy, and then they get a phone call from their daughter, who's in America, and she says, "Oh, I've just graduated from my degree. Can you come over and celebrate?" And so they jump on one of Richard's many aeroplanes and go straight over to America and get to her graduation, hats in the air, all that kind of thing. So this is to represent that Moghadam said in 1998 that social exchange theory is criticised for being culturally biased. So really it only explains maintenance in Western relationships, and even within Western culture it's only really short-term relationships among people with high social mobility that social exchange theory represents, like students. So that's why they go on their plane, they fly over, they've got high social mobility, and they go to the graduation to represent that it's only really applicable to students. So it doesn't, social exchange theory doesn't really explain people who live in collectivist cultures. They're not in it for the profit for themselves. It's more about the wider family. And even within Western culture, if you're ensconced in a marriage, you're not going to be thinking constantly, what profit am I getting out of this? But if you are young, free student with loads of mobility, then it makes sense to stay in a relationship that is the most profitable for you. So social exchange theory is culturally biased.